Now we're going to build the same simple calculator as we just built, except this time we're going to use a GUI designer tool called Pygubu. And Pygubu uses tkinter the same as we just used, but it gives you an interface where you can actually draw things out. So it's what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG. And we're going to start by installing Pygubu because it doesn't come out of the box with most Python installations. So I'm going to go ahead and open a command shell. And on my machine, I have my path configured so that it finds the latest version of Python when I execute the Python command. So you should try this as well. So if you do Python-v for version, you should see Python 3.85 and doing a lot. Actually, this is Python-verbose. So let's do exit. Let me try Python capital V. Yeah, so that's what I wanted. So this is the version Python 3.8.5. That means it's working. If you don't see this, if you see an error message like Python command not found, then you're going to want to change your path. And on Windows, the way you go to the way you do that is environment settings, edit the system environment variables. Okay, it was there, it was just buried. All right. Anyways, under advanced environment variables, system variables, you'll see something called path. If you edit that, one of these things on here should be a link for Python. Actually, I might have it on my user variables. Yeah, okay, there it is. It's the first one right here. So I have my Python installed in users mark app data local programs Python. And this is where the bin file lives. And then also have some for an older version of Python 35 in case it doesn't find it looking in Python 38. But you can go ahead and you can create a new, or you can go ahead and edit those paths, or you can create a new path. And then go ahead and make sure that you copy the correct path for your version of Python, and then move it up so it's at the top of the list, and you'll be the same as I am. After you've edited the path, be sure to close your command shell and open a new one, and that's how the environment variable will get set. So I'm going to assume your path is set up correctly and that you're seeing Python now. There's a program in the Python folder called pip, so I can type pip -- version, and it should say something like this. So this one's pip 20.1.1, and it's inside of my Python folder under lib side packages pip. So that's the pip installer. And I'm going to do pip install Pygubu. And I already have mine installed, so this is, I just get a warning that I could upgrade pip. And then pip install Pygubu Designer. And I also have this installed already, so it doesn't do much. But when you run it on your machine, it should install Pygubu and Pygubu Designer. So Pygubu is the actual library that lets your Python program load user interface descriptions from XML files. So it's a library, it takes an XML file in, builds a user interface using tkinter. Pygubu Designer is a WYSIWYG program. What you see is what you get, that lets you lay out a user interface and save that user interface description as XML. So you build an XML file in Pygubu Designer that becomes part of your project, and then your actual Python program loads that XML file and runs the user interface. So I'm going to go ahead and before I do this next bit, I've put a repository up on Git that has the Pygubu version of the Ohm's law calculator, and I'm going to cd back up to my repos folder and git clone https github.com pcc-cis133y, and then this version is called ohms law pygubu.git, and I'll cd into there. Okay, and then I'm also going to go ahead and open that in PyCharm. So this time I'm going to open, and it's users mark PyCharm projects. Actually, no, it's downloads 133y repos, ohms law pygubu. And I'll open that in a new window. So what we have here, there's a .gitignore file because we want to ignore the idea folder and the pycache folder. This answer.ui and simple.ui, these are the XML files with my program descriptions in them. So if I go ahead and right click on that and show an explorer, and then I right click and open with Notepad++, so this is an XML file, and basically it's a nested structure that shows children under parents. And so at the top I have a TTK frame with an ID top frame, and there's some padding on it, and it's using grid layout with a column 0, row 0, sticky north, south, east, west. And then there's a child under this frame, which is another frame, ID label frame, and then there's a grid definition, and then there's a label under there. And then also under my top frame is an input frame. And the input frame is using grid layout, and it's got a child, a label for volts, and a label for ohms, and an entry for volts entry, an entry for ohms entry. So just like what we built using tkinter direct. And finally, there's a third child of the top level frame, which is the button frame, uses grid, and then there's a clear button and an OK button. So exactly what we built before in tkinter, except it's an XML file. And then we're going to build something like this using Pygubu Designer. So let me go ahead and make another project folder. This time, let me go ahead and make a new project. Whoops, I'm still in Notepad++. So here's the simple calculator demo. I'm going to make a new project. That's going to be in my PyCharm projects as well. And this is going to be simple calculator, sorry, be consistent. Simple calculator demo Pygubu. And actually I should have set my path to be the one that has Pygubu in it, Python 38, and create. And I'm going to open that in a new window. So here's an empty project. I'm going to go ahead and in that project folder, let me go to that project folder. So that's in PyCharm projects, simple calculator demo Pygubu. All right, so I have nothing in here but my idea folder. And then from here, I'm going to run Pygubu-designer. And if you set your path up correctly, you shouldn't need to do anything special here. Just type Pygubu Designer. And then the name of the file I want to store my UI in. And so I'm going to call that, let's call that simple.ui. Okay, so Pygubu launched and then was put in the back for some reason. So let me see if I can find that. And actually didn't open anything because I haven't created simple UI yet. So I just want to create Pygubu Designer. Just want to run Pygubu Designer. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have three main panes. So I have an object tree pane, which looks like the tree of objects in the XML file. And then for each object, I can look at different properties of that object. So there's general properties, layout properties, and bindings. And then here's a WYSIWYG thing that sort of shows me the interface I'm building. So I'm going to start with a container, and I'm going to add a frame. So this is my top level frame. So I'll call that top level. And then I'm going to go ahead and add to my top level frame a label. So this is going to be my header label. And these get updated when you exit that entry. So like if I hit tab and go to the next one, that's what causes this to get updated. And then I can set the text. So the text is going to be Ohm's law calculator. And for reasons that are obscure, I think I need to put a backslash there. And then we'll come back to that. And then the other thing I want under this top frame is another frame. So this is going to be my input frame here. Oh, actually, I'm not ready to do that yet. So after I've added this label, when you've added the first one, you need to make sure that you go to Layout and select Grid. You can't change to grid if you have two or more things already added to them because it's already going to be pack. And you can't have the first one be grid and the second one be pack. That doesn't work. So you can only change this thing to grid if you only have one in there. Then after you've made this thing be grid, anything else you add is going to be grid as well. So this one's grid 0, 0 by default. Now if I add another frame, that's grid as well. Row 1, column 0 by default. And then that's going to be my input frame. And then I'm also going to have a button frame at the bottom. So I'll add one more frame. This is my button frame. And that's row 2, column 0. So a stack of three things. And then for the label, I'm going to go ahead and also set my font up. So that's under General. And then there should be font here somewhere. Yeah, so here's font. I want Arial. That's a Arial. And then we'll do 16 point bold. And then I want this to be centered. So I'm going to go justify center. Now this is centered in the label, but the label only runs from here to here. And the label is flush against that side. So to get this actually centered, what I want to do is look at the grid here and make sure that the sticky is doing the right thing. So I'm going to span that whole thing. And let me come back to that, because I think it's actually right, but I'll see in a minute. So I had 10 pixels of padding on this frame, so I'll go ahead and add 10 pixels of padding. And then let's go ahead and preview what I have so far. So preview, okay, not quite right yet, but we'll get there. So in this one, I want to have two labels and two entries. So under control and display, I'll add two labels. Oops. And once again, I have to remember, after I've added the first one, I have to go in here and set grid. And actually, I think I need to do that here as well. Okay. And then let's just try center here. So there's one label. Here's another label. And then I need 2 entries. And it can't add an entry to a label or to an entry, so it automatically adds it to the parent. So now I have 2 labels and 2 entries. This label is going to be row 0, column 0. This entry is going to be row 0, column 1. And then this is row 1, column 0. And this is going to be row 1, column 1. Okay. And then the sticky for that is going to be east, and the sticky for that is going to be east. And the text for this is volts. And this one I have to click off on. And then the text for this is going to be, actually let's make this one volts. And we'll make this one ohms. Okay, and then this entry, it's a little bigger. I'm going to start with nothing in the text box. And I'm going to give this a name because I'm going to have to refer to it in my code. So this is going to be volts entry. And then this one is going to be ohms entry. Okay, and then this also has no text. All right, and then I added some padding in the other version. So I added pad Y3 and pad Y3 here. And then I think I had 10 padding around this thing. Actually, probably just around here. So I had 10 padding around there. And then this button frame, I had 2 buttons in there. So add the first button, set it to grid, row 0, column 0, and then add another button, and this is going to be row 0, column 1. And then this frame, I'm going to make sticky east. And then I'm going to put a pad X of 3 here to space those 2 buttons out a little bit. And then the only thing I need to worry about is making sure that that's centered. So let's go ahead and preview. Okay. And then let's try to figure out why this isn't centered. So this thing's grid. This is centered. This widget here, it extends all the way. Justify should be centered. And it is. So it's ignoring my justify here for some reason. Okay, so not exactly sure why that's not working just yet. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the UI into my project folder. And then I'm going to go to this code tab, and this is where you can actually see the code that gets produced by this description of what I have so far. So there's 2 different ways of viewing the code here. You can view application code, and this is what we're actually going to add to our program. And then you can also look at code script, and this is a series of commands that would actually build this interface directly in tkinter. So if I hit generate, this is a series of tkinter commands that will produce the interface I had before. And you can look at the properties. So here's the font, and I have justify center here. There's a little space at the end. That might be causing some issue. Oh, that is the problem. So I had a tab there. Okay, so yeah, so I have a tab there. So let's not do that. Okay. So it actually was centering it, but it had a big blob of text, of white space at the end. So live and learn. Okay. So back to the code. So here's why I put a backslash here, because this string is delimited by single quotes. And having a single quote unescaped inside of a single quoted string is no good. Um, so let's go ahead and preview this thing one more time. I like the way it's looking so far. I need to label these buttons. So let's go here, back in design. So this is my button 1, and that's going to be the clear button. And this button 2, this is going to be the OK button. And then I want to add a command. So this is going to be the clear command. This might need to be self.clear, but I think clear is correct. And this OK is going to be the calculate command. And that should be it. So the main advantage of using Pygubu is it exposes all of these different properties that I find it really impossible to keep in my head when I'm trying to use tkinter directly. So all of these little things are just right here. I can just fill them in the form. I can see what happens directly when I do that. And when I'm done, I get to save the thing. And then I'm going to go to code and generate the application code this time and select all and copy. So I've already saved the UI file. And then I'm going to go to my new PyCharm project. So here's my simple calculator demo. There's a simple UI here. I'm going to go ahead and create new Python file calculator.py. And I'm going to paste that template code that I just got from Pygubu. And this won't quite work out of the box, but it's pretty close. So it's missing the import of tkinter. So I've added those. And then one other thing, so this is making the root, passing it in as root, but for some reason this thing doesn't have the parent object. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And then that goes in here. So this builder.get object goes with this parent here. And then everything else should be okay. So if I go ahead and run this now, boom. So here's my calculator. Now you'll notice that it included the backslash because it's not using the app code. So that means I can go back to my Pygubu Designer window and go back to the label, Design, General tab, get rid of that slash, and then click somewhere else and save. So by the way, up by here, if you make a change, like for example, change that, you'll see there's open star close. That means it's dirty. I need to save it to get those changes. So let's go ahead and Control S to save, or you can go File, Save. Okay, so I took that the backslash out. Let's run it again. Great. So my interface looks fine. Now I'm going to hook it up. I already have my clear method and my calculate method. So this run is similar to what I just had. I'm going to go ahead and do root.title Ohm's law calculator. So now my window should have a title as well, and it does. Yep. So Now I could type this code again from scratch, but I'm going to make my life easier by filching it from the other version. So I have the Ohm's law. The one I just wrote is Simple Calculator Demo. So that's what I'm going to copy here. I'm going to copy the clear method, show answer, and calculate. And then I'm going to fix it to match the Pygubu stuff. So here's my simple calculator Pygubu, and I'm going to replace the clear and calculate methods. And this is already setting up self.main window, so I think if I run this it will actually work. So let's do 100 and 100. And there's my error. Error processing. So I have an error because I haven't bound self.ohms entry or self.volts entry here. So that means when I try to access those things in the clear method or in the calculate method, these aren't defined yet. So this is not defined, and I try to do get of none, and that causes an error. So to make this work, I also want to set self.ohms entry is builder get object, and then ohms entry from parent. So that's going to bind that as a property, and then I want to do the same thing with volts. And run. And 100 and 100. Okay, so 100 volts running through 100 ohms would be 1 amp and 100 watts. And then if I do 50, that works. And then if I have an error, I get an error message. Okay, so I could quit right now, but I'm going to take the next step as well. So right now this answer thing, this is just tkinter code, but I want to build a UI for this in Pygubu as well. So I'm going to go ahead and close those out and go back to Pygubu Designer. And I'm going to create a new file. And then this one is going to have a top level frame as well. So we'll go ahead and put a frame in here. Call that top level. So this is going to be top level of answer. And it's going to have a label. So actually, let's go grid. And then we're going to go in control and display, label, and put that in a grid, row 0, column 0. I don't care what the ID is because I don't need to access this in my code. The text is the answer, no tab, and font is Arial 16 bold. We'll center justify, and we'll put 10 padding around this whole thing. So 10 padding around the frame. And then we want another label here. So it's going to be the default text. And I'll start that as empty. And then I have a little problem here. So here's the problem. When I build this Pygubu interface, let's actually look at the code that does that. So here's the Pygubu code that builds that interface. So let's look at what it's doing. So it's making a Pygubu builder object. And then that builder object has some methods on it. I can add a resource path where my project file is, and I can add from file. So this reads the XML file and builds the tkinter objects. And then there's a lookup method to get top level, and a lookup method to get ohms entry, lookup method to get volts entry. And then this thing here, this connect callbacks, that's what actually hooks up the functions that get run when I click on the buttons to the actual methods in my code. But you'll notice that this line here is taking the XML file and building the objects with tkinter. And so if I do that with the answer dialog or answer window that I just put together, the text in that second label is going to be set to nothing. It's going to be empty. So this is what it's actually going to do. It's going to make this label here. And you'll notice it's not specifying any property for text, so it gets the default, which is just empty. So I have an empty label. That means I can't change that label when I create this thing, right? There's no way of getting the actual text that I want to use into this thing here when I call this builder, you know, the builder thing, and that's the wrong one. Yeah, there's no way to supply the text, my error message or my answer text, in this add from file call. There's no way of doing that. So I have to change the value of that label inside my show answer. So here, this worked fine because I'm making a label, and when I make it, I specify some text, right? But there's no way to do that here because I'm not making the label myself. Pygubu is making the label, and I can't insert my text into that call to get it initialized. So what I have to do is I have to use a text variable. And the book showed some examples of that, but not in the context of Pygubu, so I'm going to have to do that here. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's go back to this Pygubu design, and this is the label that I want to change the text of. So I'm going to have to give it an ID. So this is going to be answer label. And then it's also going to have a text variable. So that's what controls this text right here. And we're going to call it answer text. So answer text is a string. And now I'm going to save that as answer.ui. And in my calculator, actually I want simple calculator Pygubu. This is going to be a little different. So I'll go ahead and I'll create the same top level off of main window like before. But here what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to do the same thing as I did up here. And I can get rid of this stuff here. Instead of self.main window though, for now let me just go ahead and do that. Actually, I don't think I need this top level at all just yet. Well, let me just call that to make sure everything's linked up properly. So I want to get that text entry that I just created, the string variable, and that's going to be on builder.getVariable answer text. So label text, oh, it's called answer text. Answer text is that, and then I can call, and that's a text variable, so I can call answer text dot set text. Okay, so this is building the interface under my new top level 2 window, top 2. And then it's connecting the callbacks, it's getting the variable that controls the answer label, and it's updating it. So let's run it and see what happens. So let's do 150. Okay. Whoops. Not quite. So I'm loading the wrong file here. So this is the project UI. I want the answer UI. And here. So let's run it now. There. So there's my answer. I forgot to set the justify here. But now something weird is going to happen. So let's go ahead and run this a couple more times. Let's do an error. Okay, so did you see what just happened? When I hit that time, this one popped up and all the other ones cleared out. And the reason that happened is because the text in these boxes is being controlled by a string variable, and I have a different string variable for each instance of this answer UI that I pop up, but nothing is holding on to that string variable, right? I create this variable answer text to hold that string variable, and then I use it to set this text. But this builder, it only exists inside of this function. So self.builder there's only one self.builder. And when I call this a second time, I replace self.builder with this new one that I'm building. And then this old one, there's nothing pointing at it. And eventually it gets garbage collected. So Python thinks that the old version of self.builder that I replaced here, there's nothing pointing to it, so it must be garbage. So eventually it will get thrown out when Python decides that it wants to reclaim the space. So what I need to do somehow is make sure that this builder that I create, every builder that I create, something in the program is pointing at it. Something in my main simple app object still has a pointer to this builder, and that's going to be what keeps that from getting garbage collected and that variable getting cleared out and the values disappearing from my text box. So it's a weird little thing that you have to know about. And there's a really easy fix for it. So what I'm going to do here in my init method is I'm going to create self.builders is empty. And then instead of setting self.builder equal to this, I'm going to do self.builders.append that. And nowhere else in my program am I actually looking at self.builder. Oops. Here, hold on a sec. What I want is builder equals that, and then I want to append builder. Okay, so nowhere else in my program was I looking at self.builder, so I don't really need that. But what I do need is a property on my object that has all of the builders. So every time I get a new builder, it adds it to that list of builders, and then there's a pointer to all of them so they don't get garbage collected. And it's weird, but it works. So let's go ahead and try it. So 110 and 20 and 30, and here's an error. And here's another one. And here's a good value. And I can just keep making new answer windows and they won't go away because I have pointers to all those builders. So none of those builders are getting garbage collected. Okay, and if I start closing these, it's no big deal. All right, so that seems to be everything except for this text justification. So let's go ahead and go to PyCharm, or Pygubu rather. And here's my label. And I'm going to go to justify center. And Control S to save. And then I'm going to go ahead and run. My calculator demo Pygubu. And it's centered. Okay, so that should be it for the Pygubu version of the simple calculator. It's maybe takes a little getting used to, but once you invest the effort into using a GUI designer tool, you'll find it really does make the development part faster and easier to debug.